Thom Hartmann here on the news. You need to know this. As of Thursday, Syrian officials said their country had become a full member of the Chemical Weapons Convention. However, UN officials reacted with caution. One official, speaking on the condition of anonymity, said, "I think there are a few more steps they have to take before Syria is a signatory of the convention." As of now, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is suggesting a 30-day delay before submitting chemical weapons data, but the U.S. and other nations say that the turnover of these weapons must be timely, verifiable, and complete. After meeting with his Russian counterpart, Secretary of State John Kerry said diplomatic efforts to prevent a military strike were constructive, but warned, "This is not a game," and there ought to be consequences if the handover of chemical weapons doesn't take place. Secretary Kerry kept the threat of military action alive and said, quote, "In the words of the Syrian regime, in our judgment, are simply not enough," end quote. At this time, it's unclear whether President Assad will agree to a shorter time frame or whether Russia and other nations will continue to cooperate while the threat of military action remains on the table. A spokesman for the UN said they had received an accession document from Syria which expressed their commitment to the international chemical weapons ban, and currently it's being studied. In the meantime, Secretary Kerry set up further diplomatic discussions with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the United Nations envoy to Syria. Those discussions will take place in New York later this month, and they will move on to setting up a peace conference. If Syria has begun following through on their commitments, no one said that these diplomatic efforts would be easy, but many are hopeful that efforts will be successful and keep our nation from starting another war. In screwed news, on Thursday, Washington, D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray vetoed the district's living wage bill. The legislation would have forced large employers to pay a higher hourly rate than small businesses in the area and may have kept Walmart from building new stores within the district. Mayor Gray announced the veto in a letter to Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, in which Gray called the bill a job killer and said that instead he would support increasing the minimum wage for all employees. However, he failed to mention the amount of the wage increase he would support or when such legislation might come forward. Mayor Gray wrote, "If I were to sign this bill into law, it would do nothing but hinder our ability to create jobs, drive away retailers, and set us back on the path to prosperity for all." Proponents of the living wage bill argue that the only jobs it would kill are those that don't pay a living wage, and that the bill would have saved taxpayers on the cost of subsidizing companies like Walmart. In the best of the rest of the news, on the very day that D.C.'s living wage bill was vetoed, the California legislature approved a substantial increase to that state's minimum wage. On Thursday, Democratic lawmakers in the Golden State agreed on a measure to bring the minimum wage up to $10 an hour by 2016. Many Republican legislators opposed the bill, saying it would hurt small businesses, but it passed in both the state assembly and the Senate, and Governor Jerry Brown has promised to sign it. Governor Brown said, "The minimum wage has not kept pace with rising costs. This legislation is overdue, and it will help families that are struggling in this harsh economy." It may sound like a lot, but $10 an hour has less buying power than the minimum wage did in 1968. However, it's a great improvement for those trying to survive on California's $8 an hour minimum. Many Americans commend California lawmakers for taking a step toward better pay, but say our nation still has a long way to go to get wages people can actually survive on. More than 40% of Americans can't afford to go to the dentist. On Thursday, during a hearing by the Senate Subcommittee on Primary Health and Aging, Senator Bernie Sanders announced plans to change that statistic. Senator Sanders aims to introduce new legislation which will expand dental insurance coverage to millions of Americans through Obamacare, Medicaid, Medicare, and the VA. Dental insurance would help millions of people gain access to preventative care and save taxpayers money. Senator Sanders said, when people cannot get to a dentist when they need one, they often end up in emergency rooms. It just doesn't make sense for us to spend so much money on those who wind up in hospitals, but refuse to help people get the care they need before it's too late, end of quote. Thanks to Obamacare, people now have access to preventative care, which can identify and treat problems before they become more dangerous and more expensive. Senator Sanders clearly sees that it only makes sense to ensure that preventative dental care is included. And finally, Robert Vincino thinks there's no reason to be uncomfortable after after the apocalypse. So the California man is building a 2 million square foot doomsday bunker, complete with a wine bar, a golf course, a spa, and a dance floor. And he's selling space in his underground resort at $20,000 per family. Mr. Vincino is building the bunker in Atchison, Kansas, and says he hopes it will be completed before doomsday. Of course, he doesn't plan to wait until end times to rake in the profit, and he wants to turn it into a 24/7 resort where our members can go until the moment of truth. Apparently, the wealthy must have the finer things in life, even in a post-apocalyptic world. After all, we couldn't expect the rich to wait for rapture without a wine bar and a golf course. And that's the way it is today, Friday, September 13th, 2013. I'm Thom Hartmann on the news.